All right, let's just dive straight into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the absolutely awe-inspiring, literally invisible superpower that lets tiny birds navigate across the entire globe. Every single year, millions of birds take to the skies. It's this desperate race against the changing seasons, flying back and forth between their breeding and wintering grounds. And it's a journey completely fraught with danger. Yet somehow, they return to the exact same spots year after year after year. So, how do they actually do it? Just to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this biological miracle, let's look at the Arctic tern. This little bird travels a staggering 96,000 kilometers in just 10 months. I mean, that number is almost impossible to comprehend. We're talking about a bird flying the entire length of the Atlantic Ocean, the width of the Indian Ocean, and halfway across the South Pacific before finally turning around. They literally see more daylight than any other creature on Earth. It's just wild. It really is mind-blowing when you stop and think about it. How exactly does a bird, something so small, cross oceans and continents without a smartphone, without GPS? Think about a human pilot in an airplane. They rely on this massive dashboard of digital instruments to pull off what a bird does with a brain the size of a walnut. Which brings us to Section 1, Nature's built-in GPS. Now, before we get to the really wild quantum biology stuff, we've got to acknowledge their standard navigation toolkit. During the day, they're using a sun compass, which is paired with a highly accurate internal clock to compensate for the sun moving across the sky. And at night, while nocturnal migrants use a star compass, they navigate by patterns in the night sky, specifically using the North Star as this giant, fixed celestial signpost. They also memorize the physical layout of coastlines and mountain ranges. And actually, this is crazy, they even use their sense of smell to sniff out the unique scent of their home coastline from miles away. But what's really interesting here is their remarkable adaptability. This isn't just some rigid one-trick system. If it's super cloudy out and the stars or the sun are totally hidden, a migrating bird doesn't just, fall out of the sky or give up. They seamlessly combine their tools. They can instantly switch to their mental maps, or, as we're about to see, they can tune into an invisible force field that literally envelops our entire planet. Moving on to Section 2, the magnetic superpower. For the longest time, scientists were pretty sure birds just had tiny iron magnets in their beaks, acting as a compass. And honestly, it makes intuitive sense, right? Like a tiny scout compass hidden right there in the tissue. But researchers actually figured out that those iron deposits in pigeon beaks, they were just immune system macrophages, not neurons at all. Instead, the true, proven compass relies on quantum entanglement right inside the bird's eye. Okay, to really grasp how this superpower works, we need to talk about a protein called cryptochrome. Basically, this is a highly specialized photoreceptor protein located in the rod cells of the bird's retina, and it is remarkably sensitive to even the absolute weakest magnetic fields. Migratory birds actually have a highly specific version of this called cryptochrome 4a, and the levels of this protein literally spike in their system exactly during the spring and fall migration seasons. It's an absolute masterpiece of quantum chemistry. So here's how it goes down. First, ambient blue light enters the bird's eye and hits that cryptochrome protein. This excites a single electron, causing it to bounce over to another molecule. This creates what physicists call a quantum entangled radical pair. These two electrons are now intimately linked. And finally, because they are in this incredibly delicate quantum state, the super weak magnetic field of the Earth can literally physically alter how these molecules chemically oscillate. This means birds aren't just feeling a vague pull to the north. They possess a permanent, built-in heads-up display of the planet's magnetic grid, overlaid directly on their normal vision. Since the Earth's magnetic lines tilt at different angles depending on how close you are to the equator or the poles, the birds can see exactly what latitude they're at. It is literally augmented reality, provided 100% by nature. And that leads us to Section 3, flipping the switch. Having a quantum sensor in the eye is awesome, but the brain still has to actually process that data. Researchers at the University of Western Ontario used the world's very first hypobaric climatic wind tunnel for birds to look into this. They investigated a specific area of the brain called Cluster N, which is a highly flexible region that acts as the ultimate control center for processing all this geomagnetic information. There's a great quote here from bird psychologist Madeleine Brodbeck. She says, "This brain region is super important for activating the geomagnetic compass, especially for songbirds when they migrate at night." Her work highlights just how absolutely vital this brain region is when birds are flying in pitch-black conditions. When the sun is gone and clouds cover the stars, Cluster N just kicks into overdrive, perfectly translating those quantum chemical reactions from the eye into a crystal clear internal map. And the efficiency of this system is just incredible. Researchers looked at white-throated sparrows and found out they can literally flick a switch in their brains. When they are highly motivated to migrate at night, usually to avoid predators or hot temperatures, cluster N lights right up. But when they're just hanging out, resting at a stopover site during the day, they make it go completely dormant. They shut it down to tune out the magnetic noise, kind of like taking off a pair of noise-canceling headphones when you just want some peace and quiet. Now for Section 4, when compasses go wrong. So what happens when this incredibly delicate system breaks down? Well, this brings us to a concept called vagrancy. It's an ecological term for a pretty heartbreaking phenomenon, where migrating birds become totally disoriented and end up traveling far, far away from their normal routes. Basically, if you ever see a bird that absolutely should not be in your local park, like maybe it's a species native to a totally different continent, you are very likely looking at a vagrant bird. There are 3 major external disruptions that can break their compass. First off, geomagnetic disturbances caused by space weather can physically distort the Earth's magnetic map. Then you have solar flares from the sun. These shoot out specific radio frequencies that can actually jam that delicate quantum radical pair mechanism right in the bird's eye. And finally, closer to home, the artificial light pollution from our human cities completely overwhelms their ability to use their nocturnal star compass. There was this massive UCLA study that looked at records of 2.2 million birds over nearly 60 years, and the insights are wild. They found that geomagnetic disturbances heavily correlate with vagrancy, especially during the fall migration. And surprisingly, it affects older veteran birds just as much as the young rookies. It just proves they all rely equally on this magnetic sense. And get this, high solar activity can generate so much radio frequency interference that birds will sometimes just give up and pause their migration entirely until the space weather clears up. UCLA Associate Professor Morgan Tingley hit the nail on the head here. He says if the geomagnetic field experiences disturbance, it's like using a distorted map that sends the birds off course. Basically, interfering with the geomagnetic field robs these master navigators of their primary tool. Even if the weather outside is totally calm and sunny, a silent magnetic storm high up in the atmosphere creates this sort of funhouse mirror version of their navigation map, sending them wildly off course. Now, obviously, getting lost is incredibly dangerous for them. Without familiar food sources, a lot of vagrant birds simply won't survive. But actually, there might be a bizarre silver lining here. As our global climate shifts and their traditional homes become too hot or too dry, these navigation glitches might accidentally push a few lucky birds into newly survivable habitats. It essentially allows the species to adapt and establish brand new territories by sheer accident, which is kind of amazing. So I want to leave you all with this final thought. As human activity and light pollution increasingly disrupt these super delicate biological systems, what is our responsibility to protect the invisible magnetic world that birds rely on? Knowing that these tiny superheroes rely on the fragile mechanics of literal quantum physics just to survive, how can we better minimize our impact on their incredible journeys? Because our buildings, our lights, our communications infrastructure, they all emit noise into an invisible spectrum that birds absolutely need for their survival. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope you never look at a flock of migrating birds the same way again. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.